man, let's kick off. I mean, I feel like I'm just by proxy, I'm co-famous at home because I'm with Mr. Famous at home, right? So now just by being with you, that makes me kind of famous too, doesn't it?
Man, I don't know. It's so funny.
It's good to see you, bro.
My son asked me. I have a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, and I have a 10-year-old son, an 8-year-old daughter, and an almost 3-year-old son. But my 10-year-old, my oldest, asked me the other night. I was tucking him in bed, and he goes, "Dad, be honest with me," because he sees me speak sometimes and things like that, and so people will ask for an autograph on a book or something. He's like, "Dad,
Right?
not bragging at all, but are you famous?" And I said, "Buddy, I am not famous. I am famous right here with you, and that's what matters most."
That's it.
And so it was funny.
God, that is awesome. That's so. You got to think like a kid's perception of the world, like not really knowing what all of that means. You know what I mean? Like trying to put it together. Like, okay, my dad has a book, and my parents have a podcast, and so what does that mean? Like, and they speak in front of people. That's got to be such an interesting thing for a kid to try to wrap their head around.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And we're super careful too about how we are. I mean, the nice thing for me is I've been able to bring my kids with me to sell books at the book table when we take them on. I'll take them on a speaking trip with me. They'll help me, and then we go. I do something fun with them, so I get to have one-on-one dates with each child as I get to do that. But in that process too, I'm just talking to them about this is how we serve people. This is how our family serves other families, and really bringing it to that level of going. This isn't about book sales. This isn't about that's what makes the world, like that's what helps keep food on the table. But at the same time, this is about let's pray for the family that just got that book and just got that they're changed, that their lives are influenced, that it's bringing them closer together. And so that's really what we're about, even with our kids, like that they're part of this message as well to help other families really connect at a deeper level.
And they're maybe the most interestingly, they're maybe the most important part of the equation, because it's one thing to have a bunch of ideas and it's another thing to have fruit, right? So I'm sure with some people, they look at, hey, what are your kids like? And how is this actually playing out in real time? So your kids are maybe the most important part of the equation, right?
Oh man, I always say this. I will not, the day that this starts to pull me away from what matters most, I will quit doing it. I'll give it up immediately. This is raising my family. Those 3 kids are my greatest disciples. And, I want to make sure that I'm shepherding and stewarding their hearts really, really well. And so I am unapologetic about prioritizing my family in the midst of doing all of these things. And so, do I get it right all the time? No. But am I keeping it at the forefront? Do I have people around me that kick my butt if they start to see me go away, go by the wayside? Yes. And my wife is number one at that. I mean, we just really do a great job of trying to keep each other on task and focused on the main thing. So.
Yeah, will you talk about that real quick? I've always thought that accountability, anytime you'll see a pastor who has a moral failure or something, like, he just didn't have accountability. But accountability is only as good as what you're willing to share, right?
Yeah.
So how have you set up those controls in your life? What is that like to where it's actually effective, where it's actually a real guardrail and not just kind of lip service?
Yeah, it's wild. I think for us, I don't know, like we literally share everything. We have our Google calendars, we have each other's, passwords onto our phones. We've got all of that kind of component. I give my phone to Christy at any given point of a day and have her look at it and be okay with that. So I think there's that. And to be honest with you too, we have built, and I think this is the key, getting rid of the accountability word and getting rid of the, making sure that, we have no secrets, that type of thing. I think it goes deeper than that. I think, my wife and I have built such a relationship where she's genuinely my best friend. And everything that happens to me in a day, I want to go tell her. Like, I want her to know. I want her to be the first to know if something bad went wrong, if something went wrong, something went right. I just want her to be the first to know. And I think you've got to cultivate that friendship with your spouse in order for all true accountability comes down to relationship. I think it's the same thing with our relationship with God, right? Like when we experience God's love for us, it compels us to love others. It leads us to obey him. We want to obey him because we experience his love for us. And I think it's the same thing. It's that love. When there's a deep love and connection, you don't want to do something that's going to hurt somebody else or yourself. You want to do everything you can
Yeah.
to prioritize and protect that relationship. And I think that's where it really starts.
Yeah. I love that. May take us back to so famous at home is the name of your podcast. It's the name of your book. It's and it's your ethos. Will you take us back to the beginning of that? Where did that term, where that idea, where'd that come from? Give us a little bit of the kind of the origin story of all of that.
Yeah, I think it really starts honestly personally. I don't know that there's anything that God gives us or that we get passionate about that's not somehow born within our own personal story. And my parents divorced when I was 10. My dad had another divorce when I was 19. And I
Hmm.
had great parents. Like I love my parents dearly. But what I started to see as I started doing my own therapy and looking back into my genogram and just seeing like my family history, every single person in my family, from my parents to my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my sister, every single person had been divorced at least once, and a lot of them twice. And it was one of those things that I saw this generational pattern and going, okay, I don't want to experience that. I want to.
Yeah.
I had such a great relationship with both of my parents, but yet I was then ending up splitting time with them because I couldn't experience both of them at the same time because of the divorce. And so I think it starts there. Ultimately, I just wanted to I had a deep desire to have a great family and to really write the generational lineage. But then also too, as I got my counseling degree and was seeing, one of the and being a crisis response, working in crisis response, we started getting phone calls related to, as you mentioned earlier, ethical and moral failures, pastors, leaders, business owners, just people who were burned out, people who were really, I think all of us at some level, as Tim Keller says, we're all spiritual addicts. We believe this lie that, that we can seek fame outside the home, that we can seek identity outside the home, and that that's
Hmm.
going to fuel us and fill us up. And I think somewhere along the way, just living in the Western cultural world that we live in, it's easy to become sucked into that. And what ends up happening is you slowly over time stop prioritizing your biggest fans under your roof and start paying attention to your biggest fans outside your roof, and whether that's board members, whether that's Instagram followers or clients or whoever it is, you all of a sudden start to give them more affection and attention, and your family's getting your leftovers. And we just started to see this trend, and just realizing, like, at the end of the day, what we really do is we help people be famous at home, because when you're famous at home first, that's when you can thrive on your stage. That's when you can thrive on whatever stage God has called you to. And we just want to make sure we prioritize that. I mean, the other component of that is most end of life surveys will show that people, the thing that they regret the most is that they work too much and they wish they would have spent more time with their loved
Wow.
ones. And so, you know, what will really matter at the end of life? And I try to keep that at the
Yeah.
forefront of my mind in terms of how I lead my family as well.
Yeah. We had an all day session yesterday, basically on our why at Aro. And the thing we came down to was basically this idea of that our time is much more limited than we understand. And, this idea that 90% of the time we'll spend with our kids happens by the time they're 18. It's done. Right. But
Whew,
we're living as if we have just this unlimited amount. Think about that. Yeah. Let that sink in for a second.
wow.
So here, Josh, here's what that means for me practically. My son's 14. He's almost 15. If I get 40 minutes with him a day, 40 minutes, which seems like a little bit, but between sports and between homework and work and everything, 40 minutes is probably on average between now and 18. That means I have 40 days left with him until he leaves. 40
Good
days,
grief.
right? And so we're
Ooh,
living, and so we're living as if we have this unlimited amount of time, and it's just, and that's not okay. And here's the cool thing is that, what if someone said that, hey, you can extend that, and you can extend it by, maybe, we think about phones a lot. You can extend it by not checking your texts on the weekends or after 5:30 on weekdays, or not checking work emails for during that same amount of time. And I can double that amount of time. The answer is yes, of course, right? And
yeah.
so that's not a dramatization. We play like it is a dramatization, but that's actually an option all of us have. And if you're focused, just like you're saying, on being famous at home, and that's what's most important, that's what ultimately leads you to a place where you don't have regrets. Because how much of that factors in? It's a long statement, but the question associated with that is, how much in what you talk about is about regret elimination? Is that something on the forefront, or is that just kind of an underpinning in all of that?
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. And I think there's an underlying, whether it's subconscious or unconscious. I think, if you're listening and there's moments we lay in bed at night, looking at our lives, and the biggest pain point might be a child that we don't feel like we're connecting with, or maybe it's with our
Mm,
spouse. We just don't feel like we're connecting. And a lot of times that pain will be there. It's the thing that's keeping us up at night. And but we don't know where to start. And I hear this a lot, particularly from
yeah.
men. I hear, I can go to work and I can lead hundreds of people, but I come home and I don't know how to lead my own family. And I just
Mm,
want to say, I think, that regret kind of lives there, or that thought of regret kind of lives there. And a lot of people just don't know where to
yeah.
start. And I would just say that the biggest place to start is looking at your realizing you're not alone, realizing you're not the only one,
Mm,
and also realizing too that really all our family members desire, all our biggest fans, your spouse, your kids, all they desire is you. They just desire your
yeah.
presence, your time. uh that's where great leadership starts, is just entering into their world, entering into their story. That might look like taking your spouse on a date night,
Yeah.
and doing the planning, not waiting till the night of and saying, hey, what do you want to do? Like actually putting the work in and planning where you're going to go, and that type of thing. It also looks like, hey, if I got to get on the floor and build a train track, with my 2-year old, or I um, draw with my daughter. She loves drawing and sketching. And, if I sit down and she says, Daddy, will you draw with me? It's just, yes, I'm going to put my phone away. I'm going to put my work away, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to give her that undivided attention. And I think that's where it really is as simple and as complicated as that.
I like how you said that it is as simple and as complicated as that. It's both, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And just the identification, when I've gone to therapy in the past, one of the most comforting things in it is when I describe something about what I'm going through, what I'm struggling with, and then they give it a name. And I think, oh, if the fact that it has a name means that other people are dealing with it. That means that I'm not the first one. And that means that this is a common thing. That means that there's something I can do about it that's happened before.
That's exactly right. I think so often we feel lonely or alone when we feel like we're the only ones. And just voicing, hey, this is the issue, this is what I've got, realizing you're not the only one.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I love that you said when you said I knew raising kids wasn't easy. This goes back to what you're saying. It's simple and complicated. You said I knew raising kids wasn't easy, but could it be simpler?
Yeah.
Will you give us a little glimpse into that statement? Because I love that statement.
Yeah, that goes back to when we had our first two, and we were completely overwhelmed. And I mean, you have to understand, like, I did all my doctoral research on attachment and this whole idea of emotional safety. And I started going back into the research because, there's so many things that parenting experts are throwing our way, like, uh, so many debates, so many pressures, so many fears around, you can't even leave the hospital before you have to make a decision about whether or not you're going to immunize your child. And we all know what that debate's like today. You get them home, and then
Yeah.
you're going to say, hey, do we breastfeed or do we bottle feed? Do we spank or do we not
Hmm.
spank? Do we do time outs? Well, maybe experts are saying timeouts aren't so good. We have to do time ins, right? Well, what's that look like? And I'm not even getting into BPA free products and gluten free diets and everything like that. So it was so overwhelming that I
Oh boy.
decided, I was like, I'm going back into the research, and I want to see, when I'm at the end of life, I'm 80 years old, I'm sitting on my rocking chair, I'm watching my grandkids run through the backyard, I'm seeing my adult kids grown up, what will have really mattered? And every major outcome that I desire in my kids, from getting good grades to extracurricular activities as children, to having good friends as children, all the way to finding a career as an adult that you love and that you enjoy, getting married, staying married, and having high marital satisfaction, actually enjoying your marriage. All of these things were linked back to this whole idea of emotional safety in the home.
Huh.
And so we just really came to this place of going, you know what? We are going to prioritize simply making our home an emotionally safe environment for our kids. And
Hmm.
is it going to make parenting any easier? No, but can it simplify it so that we're not caught up in all of these other debates and all these other things? If my children feel emotionally safe with the people that they trust and love the most, that wires their brain for relationships over time, and it leads to all those major outcomes that we desire. And so that's what I really meant by that. And
Yeah.
we've seen it happen over and over and over again. So we're just that's
What
kind of our clarion call, is that whole idea of how can we be safe for our kids.
what does that mean? What does emotional safety mean?
Yeah, great question. So I like to describe it as it's the posture from which we parent more than the techniques. It's the posture from which we're
Mm,
parenting, not the techniques that matters most. And so many of us, we get caught up by techniques because we get caught in the day to day with our toddlers or our kids that, they're misbehaving or whatever that looks like. And so one technique on one child might not work on that same child. And one technique that works
yeah.
today on one child might not work tomorrow on that child, right? So techniques will always come and go, and they'll ebb and flow. And a lot of techniques are very one-way relationships. So it's like, I'm the parent, I said so, don't do this, go to timeout, or whatever that looks like. Or it's, you know what, you're sure you can go to Johnny's house for to play this afternoon. You're going to want to do it. So it's just either permissive or this authoritarian. Whereas what we really talk about is the posture. It's getting into the heart of our child, entering into their story and seeing what is causing the overwhelm, what is causing the frustration, the
Yeah.
anger, the sadness, the heartbreak, even if that anger is coming at us as a parent, how can we enter into our child's world and enter their story and help
Mm,
have that has a calming effect on their brain in a way that really does that. I One example of this is I had I was working with a guy his 14-year-old daughter wanted to go to a Friday night football game, and he said no. And she looked at her dad and she said, "Dad, I hate you." And she went storming to her
mm,
bedroom. And the way that I say this is the posture of emotional safety isn't punishing the negative emotion. It's not saying, "Don't you go to your room, I'm
yeah.
taking your phone for a month, and don't you ever speak to me that way again." Um, it's also not minimizing it by saying it's just a Friday night football game, who cares? And it's also not dismissing it by going, don't be mad at me, right? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
The posture of emotional safety is our ability to enter into our child's world and look at her and say, honey, what is it about that Friday night football game that matters to you so much? And what that dad found out is that his daughter had been rejected by a group of friends that she hung out with in the previous school year. And she would see them posting pictures on Instagram and Snapchat of them hanging out without her. And this was the first Friday night they invited her
Wow.
to be a part of something. And her dad said no.
Wow.
And
Oh.
so the I hate you wasn't personal. The I hate you was coming out of
Mm,
that fight, flight, or freeze response in the brain, the overwhelming limbic system of that rejection coming back up again. And I'm not saying that the posture from which I describe this is lead in grace and follow in truth. So we want to lead in grace with our kids, enter into their story. And it's not that this dad shouldn't set consequences for the way she disrespected and spoke to her dad. But if you lead in truth, my friend John Townsend says, truth without grace will always be received as condemnation. And so we want to lead in grace and follow up in truth. And that's just the framework for what posture looks like.
dude, that's strong because and just very candidly, hearing emotional safety conjures up in my mind a little bit of like coddling.
Yeah,
Just by the term, and even at the beginning of
totally.
that, even at the beginning, my question was going to be, was where does discipline fall in there? But as you said, all of that, it's just like, oh dang, like yeah, you gotta find out the response, and part of it probably depends, and just candidly, I think I think probably in my kids' first 10 years, I think I parented from a position of like behavioral control. Like I know I was really good at it too. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just like, I made some pretty good robots there. And then I've just learned more and more like, holy crap, I gotta make a little bit of a change because there is a lot behind that. There's a lot behind, I hate you, dad. And okay, well, what does
Yep.
that mean? So I think in that explanation, that story really hits because I can I can feel it, and I think mine would probably be truth first, grace second, which they only hear as condemnation.
Well, and I would say this too, that a lack of discipline is also unsafe. If there's not discipline, our
Oh,
kids feel unsafe. If there's not discipline in the home, our kids, they are given free reign, and all of a sudden they feel out of control, and that just increases anxiousness and kids need routine. And so just to follow up with this example, basically what his dad did was he listened to what what was going on in his daughter's heart. But then he also shared, his concern that, hey, what if you go to this game and they reject you there? And he didn't want to leave her out and that type of thing. So they come to an agreement where, okay, you're going to go to this Friday night football game, but I'm going to go. But the dad says, hey, I'm going too. And I'm going to be in the stands in a different location. And if anything comes up, you let me know. I want to make sure that this is a good, dynamic. But you're also going to get your cell phone taken for 2 weeks or a month for the way you spoke to me. Right. So after the football game, here's the consequence. Right. And I can't remember what consequence he actually did set, but he did follow it up with a consequence. And I think we've got to be able to model that grace and truth in every circumstance. Cause I love Mr. Rogers' definition of discipline. He said, I think of discipline as the continual everyday process of learning self-discipline.
Oh, interesting.
And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to teach our kids. We don't want our kids to be robots, as you said earlier. We want our kids to leave our home and have self-discipline. And that's where that comes into play. And as you said earlier, with the phones, it starts with us. I mean, it at the end of the day, it starts with how we're doing with it. So,
yeah. I want to jump in. I want to dive into the book that released. Was it May of last year?
Yeah. Yep.
So I want to dive into that, but before I want to hear about, you've done something. You said phones. I want to go into a little bit of the drastic measure that you've taken with your phone recently, and maybe a little bit of the why and then a bit of the what as well.
Yeah. So I basically took my iPhone, and I have an iPhone 13. We got it, maybe a year ago or whatever, for the camera and that type of thing, and with what we do with podcasting and videoing. But I have a friend who decided he was going to get a flip phone. And he did that about maybe 2.5 years ago. And over that 2.5 years, the more I heard his life and how much he enjoyed his life without with a flip phone, I was getting envious. And there were just parts of it where he's like, yeah, I'm totally with my kids. We're doing board games. We have no screens in the evenings. And I'm like, man, his life just feels so. And I'm like, well, help me logistically think through how he has a business. And I'm like, how are you doing that? And he's like, well, I'm managing some of that during my work day and my work day only. And then I've got my assistant who's helping me, and going, okay, so I'm starting to think through this. Finally, after about 2 to 2.5 years, I told Christy at the end of last year, I said, in the beginning of 2023, I'm figuring this thing out. I'm calling to see if I can get a flip phone. Long story short is I still owed money on my iPhone. It would have been a bear to get rid of it and buy a flip phone. It would have been expensive. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to dummy down my iPhone. And so what I did was I figured out how to get Safari off. I got all web browsers off. I've got no social media apps on it. I pretty much dummied it down to texting and calling. And then I use it for pictures and videos of our kids and things like that, so I was able to just have one device, but it is genuinely dumbed down to, I can't scroll on anything. There's no news apps. There's literally nothing on it. And it has brought so much more space to my soul. It has freed up my soul in ways that I don't think I realized. The first couple weeks that I did it, I would jump on my phone and my thumb would literally start scrolling to go to, I would try to scroll over to get to my apps that I would want to go on and look. And there was nothing there. It just went to the library of apps. And I'm like, oh shoot, like I can't do anything. But it was so amazing how my brain was so wired. But then also too, I think about when I would, there's like a detox you have to go through, right? Like you pick up your phone and all of a sudden you're going to your phone because you want to check emails. You want to check, I have no emails on my phone anymore. You want to check, you want to stay up to date on everything that's going on. And I realized the anxiety that just, not that I was anxious, but there was an underlying current of, I was anxious to get I have anxious moments of like knowing to keep up with my to-do list and keep up with everything. And I've just basically used my workday now to catch up on emails at certain times. I've compartmentalized everything, and I'm writing more. I'm praying more. I am spending more quality time with my wife and my kids. I'm more mentally present. And so it's funny because you and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago with Heath, and it's wild because I still haven't found a disciple yet. Like I tell people that I've done this and people are excited about doing it. But when it comes to the reality of it, for me, it took me 2.5 years to actually pull the trigger on it. And I think for a lot of us, it is a very hard shift to make. And so I'm not saying that everybody has to. I don't want anybody to feel condemned or guilty or ashamed that they haven't done it. I'm just saying I really felt like it was time for me to do it. And it's been really life-giving. So.
Well, what's interesting is here's what's cool about doing that. Whether someone, and by the way, you could make an argument that you have the dumbest iPhone 13 on the planet.
I like that.
So
hey, I'll take it. I'll take it.
You take that. This is the dumbest phone in the world. When we left lunch, so Heath Wilson, Aro co-founder, and I, when we left lunch with you a few weeks ago, Heath in the car immediately took email off his phone, took Instagram off his phone. He deleted, I think, upwards of 15 apps off his phone. I took Safari off my phone. I took Instagram off my phone. So what you did, whether now my phone's not as dumb as yours, but I will say that it gave me permission to do it. I said, okay,
I do have
Josh
disciples.
I can do it.
I knew I have disciples.
Yeah, bro,
I do have 2 disciples.
Yes, a mini disciple. That's right. Like a disciple light. You know what I mean? I'm not full disciple yet.
Oh, I love
so
it.
Yeah, you got disciples out here.
Good, man. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's great. Yeah. What's it been like? I'm just curious.
It gave permission.
Yeah, permission. And that's
I haven't honestly now. I've not taken the email off my phone. That's the next step for me. I think if you were to ask Heath, he doesn't feel like he's missing anything. It does feel, and our mutual friend Justin Whitmiller early talks about when it comes to screens, it's more for him about finding spaces for it. It's not necessarily like an all ongoing, but then you said it compartmentalizing, which is another way to say it, is just you're finding spaces. Okay, right now is my space to do emails. And I think we do rationalize, all of us, and I know my former career in commercial real estate, I would rationalize, no, I got to always be on. I don't actually think that's true. I really don't. So I think we're rationalizing and okay, how about this? After we finish, I'm going to take email off my phone. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so we'll, y'all be more of a disciple. But I think
if I can say this,
even just talking about it, I'm just rationalizing.
100%. And I rationalized for so long, and I was trying to figure out a way to think through every scenario to go, how am I going to, what about GPS? What about music? What about podcasts? What about, and I started, and I'm going, you know what? I got to a point where I realized I can't, if I try to think through every app and every dynamic on my phone, I'm never going to do it. I'm going to rationalize it. I'm going to do it. So my decision came down to, I'm just going to do it and let the inconveniences hit me when they hit me. And I'll figure it out as I go. Good. And that's kind of the way that I went, is like, I'll just tackle the inconvenience when that inconvenience comes up. And I've had it come up multiple times, especially when I lose luggage in an airport, and I don't have email on my phone. So I can't pull up I'm literally pulling up my computer and I'm like connecting to Wi-Fi. There's some inconveniences, but the pros have outweighed those inconveniences in some pretty drastic ways. So
I can absolutely see that. Just think about the time you're gaining back. And again, my biggest time stealer, I referenced it earlier, my biggest time stealer is text and emails. Those are the biggest time stealers for me. So,
and I still have text
I like that.
on.
So you just let those.
I still have text on. Yeah, I do. So.
Well, because that's you harnessing the good of it. I mean, you and I, texted back and forth, and you're very responsive on text. And so it's not like you're a hermit or anything like that. And so it's, I just from an outsider observation, it doesn't seem like you've missed a lot. And again, you probably then when it's email time or whatever it is, you're more productive because you have that space for it right then.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can already tell we're gonna. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I'm specifically just going through that list very quickly. So.
Yeah, exactly. I can already tell we're going to run out of time, and so we have to talk about the Famous at Home book. This is, man, it's good. Where did you've done your podcast in 2017, you have a lot of content. Did it just get to a point where you said, I got to get this down in a centralized place? What was that like? What was the decision like to go do that? And then what was the process like in going after it?
Yeah, great question. So we had a lot of people, like whether we were speaking or whether we were helping families, we do a lot of one-on-one, coaching, and we just had a lot of people saying, hey, how can we go through a coaching? Like, how can we take what you're doing and implement it in our own lives? And it was one of the, people were asking us, do you have a book for this? And one of the things I learned is somebody said to me, if you get asked the same question 3 times, there's probably a product there, right? There's something there. And we were getting asked that question a lot. Like, do you have a book on this? Do you have a book on this? And so we got to a point where we said, you know what, we really need a manual. We really need a coaching manual. If this is how we're going to coach family, if this is how we coach families, here's a manual. Like, here, go do these things, implement these things. And that's really what it became. And 7 decisions. So it's called Famous at Home, 7 decisions to putting your family center stage in a world competing for your time, attention, and identity. And it's those 7 decisions. And of course, there's a number of chapters in there ahead of time that really talk about our chase, what we were chasing, some of our own brokenness, because we're all chasing things outside the home, and our own brokenness, our own journey, and really just getting vulnerable with some of that. And then just some of the key things to think about before you enter the decisions. And then what does it look like to make those decisions one at a time and really lead yourself into a place where your family is growing and thriving. So
you said something in there that jumped out in the competition for our identities and the competition. And you think about everything competing for us. I was talking with my brother Jacob today. We're talking about this concept of what's good. And he's, if you ask enough questions, like, it'd be like, well, because why are you doing something? Well, you ultimately come down to because it's good. And then he said his definition for what is good is what God has called good. And if you view your time and your identity and all of that as a competition, and you look through that lens of, is this good? I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. But thinking about it as a competition, especially as maybe a male competitive mindset, that helps me to say, okay, if I'm prioritizing my kids and I just get a work email, that's a competitor to my kids' attention. Well, that's easy, right? Because I know what's good, I know what's fulfilling. So I like how you use that word competition.
Yeah.
In all that, I don't know if there's not really a question there, but just something that hits me in your description of it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And because it's all, what your yes is going to be someone else's no. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, what are we saying yes to and what are we saying no to? And I think our no's are very hard to make. No's can be super difficult,
Yes.
With the pressures and the notifications and the demands of the world around us.
Let's see if Mixer can ask this question well. What's the, and maybe this is self-evident, but what is the alternative to being famous at home? The book's called Famous at Home, but what's the alternative? What happens if we're not famous at home?
What's a good question? I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question before. I think the alternative is, if I had to think on it, I think the alternative is broken relationship. At the end of the day, it is relationship that is disconnected. It's being disconnected from the heart of our spouse. We talk a lot about pursuing the heart of your spouse, looking at what's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you, and really fighting for your spouse's heart. And the Bible says to guard your heart. It is the wellspring of life. And, I think when we get married, we have one marital heart that we have to guard. And that starts with me protecting and guarding my wife's heart and prioritizing what's going on in her heart. So if she's angry over, and really frustrated over how messy the kitchen is, I want to go, okay, this isn't about the kitchen right now. Are you overwhelmed? Or, what's really going on in your heart? And me pursuing that to say, where is it that you need some rest? Where is it that you need me to step up? Where is it that maybe something happened to you today, that a friend said something that just, or you lost a loved one? What is it that's really hurting, that's making this about the kitchen right now, kind of thing? And I think in such a busy world, our lives are so busy. We got kids moving from one activity to another. We often live on the surface talking about the busyness of the day rather than the heart connection. What are you feeling? What's your heart saying? And I think, oftentimes when we start focusing on the busyness, we start to seek things outside the home that bring us affirmation, that bring us identity, that bring us a sense of self-worth. And when that starts to crumble, and it's subtle, it doesn't happen overnight. It's subtle. It's a subtle disconnection over time. I think when we stop paying attention to the hearts of our kids or the hearts of our spouse, that disconnection happens over time. And I think that's what it looks like. I think it looks like disconnected relationship.
Which is terrible. It really is. I mean, it's, when you said broken, I think I like how you said disconnected, because it's broken when you think broken, you almost think in shambles, but disconnected may just, it's not necessarily in shambles when it's disconnected, but it's maybe equally as detrimental. Maybe it's equally as painful, maybe even worse, because I always say, like in a college football team, like it's probably easier to turn around a 2-10 college football team than an 8-4 team. You know what I mean? Because at least you can
So
start from scratch, but if you're mediocre, like what the heck can you do?
such a great statement. Absolutely. I think 100%. And in fact, I think I've seen a lot of broken relationships. And I say this to couples who are in a broken state. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you use the 2 and 10 team. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll ask couples, where are you at in your marriage? 1, I'm on the verge of divorce. 10, it couldn't be any better. I have seen 1s and 2s be absolutely transformed when they are both willing to pursue the other person's heart. I have seen those marriages go eons beyond couples that just live at a 5 or a 6 on an ongoing basis, and they're okay with living at a 5 or a 6. It's like, I don't want to mess up what we have is working, but I don't want to do the work that'll probably drop us down to a 3 or a 4 for a time, to live at a base of 8 or 9. I want to live at that base. To me, that's where I want to constantly be pursuing my wife's heart so that I can live in my marriage. Will we always live at a 10? No, but I think we'll have 10 moments. I think if I could live at a base of an 8 to an 8.5, and we have 10 moments, and sure, we'll have 5 moments, but I'd rather live at that end of the spectrum than at the bottom end, or right in the middle where I'm bouncing from the bottom and maybe every now and again hitting an 8. I have seen those marriages that actually have hit a 1 or a 2, and those people said, yes, I want to get better. We want to pursue each other, just propel all the way to an 8 or a 9. So 100% what you said, that's the 2 and 10 team versus the 8 and 4 team.
Yeah. Right.
It's a good analogy.
So thank you. I appreciate it. 3 parts of the book. You said the 7 decisions. That's part 3 of the book. Will you hit a couple of those 7 that are maybe just to give a little teaser to the people so they'll go buy the book because they need to, but maybe a couple of your favorites within there of those 7 decisions to put your family center stage?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And at the end of the day, I would say that the hub of the wheel is the emotional intelligence component. It's what we were talking about earlier. It's the emotional safety, that's the hub of the wheel. So whether it's marriage, whether it's parenting, whether it's my own relationship with how I'm showing up to the world around me, everything with teenagers, toddlers, infants, whatever, that hub of the wheel is emotional connection. And so, decision number 3 is talk about emotions. It's making emotional vocabulary normal in your home. And I think that's that's the crux of it. That's the hub of the wheel. It really starts. And so then flowing into 4 and 5 is, how do you apply that to your spouse and your relationship with your spouse? And we give a very practical way to do that. And then how do you do that with your kids? How do you enter into your kids' world where they're actually identifying with a feelings chart, what they're feeling, their highs and their lows through feelings, as opposed to just saying their favorite part of the day? Because it's taking them a level deeper, and it's cultivating that sense of safety in the home. The very first one, and I want to make this practical, is to go back to number 1, and that's, what can you do? And we've talked about this throughout the episode. It's showing up as the best version of you. What is one thing that you need to do today to start showing up as the best version of you? Because how you show up in your house establishes the environment around you. The environment of your home, there's something about if you watch cable news 24/7 in your home, or it's on all the time, a spirit of fear will live in your home, because that's what comes out of the news channels.
Right.
If we are, and so for me, like when Micah, our youngest, was a baby, like if I'm waking up when he's waking up, I tend to start my day differently than if I get up an hour ahead of him, have a workout, do some quiet time, sit with the Lord. I show up when my wife comes downstairs, when my other kids come downstairs, I'm way more engaged than if I feel like I've started my day from behind. So my first decision a number of years ago was to say, regardless of what time I go to bed, I'm waking up at 5:30 in the morning, and I'm going to do a workout, and I'm going to spend time reading the Bible. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I just made that decision every day. That was the one decision for me to start showing up differently. And now that's become a habit. I do it all the time. So now my decision for showing up as a better version of me consistently changes over time. But, again, the last version of that for me was to turn my phone into a dummy phone. I mean, I know I'll show up better if I go to that level. And so, but again, this isn't cold turkey. This like start with where you know you're
Yeah.
supposed to start, and you know deep down that one thing you need to do to get to that next level. And I just would encourage you to start there.
I'll tell you to start a little bit sooner than that. You need to buy Famous at Home. I'll make the plug for you. That's what people need to do. That's where you start. Go start with the book. I couldn't agree more with you on that. The atmosphere. We underestimate the atmosphere. I asked my kids one time, and this is probably like 4 years ago. So my daughter was probably 9. And so we were driving to school, and I had just very, I'd gotten onto her the night before, but it wasn't aggressive. And I said, my wife, who's hilarious, she's 5 feet tall, Italian, fire as she can be, as you can hear me guarding my words so I don't get yelled at when I get home. But she said, she'll jump on him. She'll jump all over him and get on their case. And I say something very, not even that harsh, and it just crumbles my kids. Right. And so we're driving to school, and I asked my daughter, Gianna, I was like, gee, why is it the mom can yell and you laugh, and then I say something just little, and it changes you? And she says, well, and this is a 9-year-old, she goes, well, your words just have more weight. And I thought, oh, bro, that's the
Wow.
atmosphere. I can attest to what you're saying. The atmosphere that we bring in, we underestimate the atmosphere that we create just with how we are, how we act, what our mood and what our attitude is. It's transformational right there.
Yeah, that atmosphere component is amazing. And I'll say this to you too. This is fun. You were talking about competition earlier. I just got to give this shout out here for you as well, because you're so kind and generous about Famous at Home. But with Aro, I love the competition that you've created between Christy and between me and Christy, because we're always fighting for who has our phone in the box the longest
Love
each
it.
day. And so thank you for that, because it's actually been helpful for our marriage. It's awesome for her, because she doesn't feel like she can go to the extreme that I did, because she's doing a lot of our finances. She's also, doing a lot of the groceries and things like that. And so she keeps a lot of those things on her phone. And as a mom who's balancing all these things, she has a very difficult time. She has to have her phone near her to be able to do stuff when she gets the free moments to do it. And I just want to make sure that whoever's listening, if you're a mom listening, there's zero shame or condemnation for my wife has to do those things. And so the Aro has been huge for her in that regard. So thank you for it.
Yeah.
And
well, absolutely,
because it's been huge for our family.
I love that. I appreciate that very much. I didn't prep you for this question. I always forget to prep people for this question, so I apologize. You're going to have to go off the cuff. So what you're about to hear, listener, is some brilliance from Josh Straub.
I don't know.
So the Aro Podcast is all conversations with people who strive to live intentionally. So I'd like to hear from you. What is that word or that concept? What does intentionality mean to you?
Oh, you didn't prep me.
I didn't. I know. Apologies.
I'm going to give you something that's at the forefront of my mind right now. And it comes out of Proverbs chapter 4. And I was praying yesterday, and the Lord gave me Proverbs chapter 4, where it says, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. But I felt like the Lord was saying, go to the Message version and read the Message version. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I went to the Message version, and in it tells you to keep your path straight, and basically to not look to the right or to the left. And it says, avoid sideshow distractions. And that phrase, sideshow distractions, just popped off the page at me. And I was like, oh, wow. And so when I think of intentionality, I think of guarding my heart to stay focused on what is right in front of me and what my priorities are in that moment, and avoiding sideshow distractions. So when it comes to my family, I want to guard my family's heart. I want to guard my heart, and I want to do everything I can as a father to guard my children's hearts. But in so doing, I want to avoid, for me to be truly intentional, I have to avoid sideshow distractions. I have to avoid the emails that are coming in. I have to avoid the tendency to want to go check my, walk into my office now because I can't check it on my phone. Maybe walk into my office during an evening and just see if what the emails are showing. I have to avoid the sideshow distractions. And I think that's what intentionality comes down to, is really It's a part, it's a part of guarding our heart, because that's where we really live out of, is what the Bible says. And then being able to stay focused on the path with what God has put right in front of us. And that first thing that he's put in front of us to shepherd is our kids. And I think to me, that's what intentionality looks like.
Dude, that's hot fire. That's off the cuff too. That's good stuff.
That's fresh from yesterday's prayer time. So
I love that. It's so good. I'm going to put you on the spot again. Can we give away, if we'll buy them, but can we give away a few autographed copies of Famous at Home to our listeners? Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Do some of that.
I'd love to do that.
All right, we'll have some when we post. Well, we'll post when we post it on socials. We'll tell the way to do that. Josh, where can people go? Obviously, again, the book is Famous at Home. You can find it anywhere books are sold. What's your website, your socials? If people are looking to connect more with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, famousathome.com. And then you can find us on Famous at Home on Facebook and Instagram. So Famous at Home. That's where to go.
That's awesome. Josh, thank you, brother. I really appreciate your wisdom, your time, your insight. This is really real awesome stuff that I'm going to go, again, my first thing I'm going to do after this, I'm going to go take email off my phone. So when your disciple continues on here.
I love it. Hey, thank you so much, Joey. I appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on. It means a lot.
Yeah, man. Thank you.